I already have a term for this where I say, like, if you look at it, the history of colonization is white men going around and telling brown and black women to cover their boobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's because you can't say shit to a woman with her tits out. Like, just try it. Hello. Welcome back, everybody, or welcome if you are new. This is the Hey White Women podcast, where me and the White Woman Whisperer are deconstructing white supremacy like the cult that it is. I am Daniella, also known as the Knitting Cult Lady. I'm a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership. And I spend my days just pulling apart cults and what makes them tick and helping people understand where we see that kind of group behavior in other things around me. But I always say that you don't get far into deconstructing cults before you come up against the fact that white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism are these big overarching cult systems that we have. And as much as I, as a white person, want to be entirely out of the cult of white supremacy, we still have a lot of deconstructing to do. And so, welcome, Rebecca. Thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you for having me and having the tough conversations and just help break this cultic cycle and the cultic abuse that has been inflicted on all of us. And I like to say, if white supremacy has touched me and manipulated my value system, then I never want to hear a white woman tell me she doesn't have a racist bone in her body, because it's not about your bones. If I got it, you got it. So like, we might as well start talking about it, as much as it kind of stings, which is a culty aspect. You know, if you can't question it or talk about it, say the words white supremacy, maybe there's where you start seeing it.
Yeah. Well, and another interesting thing with that is, like, when you're in a cult, they have loaded language, right? So terms that are thrown out that mean something, that have a whole bunch of meaning, that's usually really intense for the cult member. And I think, like, we have a lot of that going on when we talk about, something like white privilege, right? Is such a loaded term that we almost have to stop and define everything as we're talking about it.
Ooh, that's really interesting. And you said, like, for the cult members, the loaded language for the cult members, which clicks so much for me, because I remember at first realizing, like, oh, white supremacy is the problem. But I knew somewhere that white people flinch at hearing the term white supremacy. Black people are the ones ready to say it, but, like, who should be uncomfortable? And
right.
if, like, why are white people the ones that get, and that's just proof of the indoctrination, right? Like, how could that make you physically uncomfortable without it being driven in that this is something we don't talk about? Like, first rule of White Club is you don't talk about White Club. And that's why we're talking about it, is, like, the most important thing. So
I love it. And actually, the epigraph of my memoir, Uncultured, I say the first rule of cults is you're never in a cult. Right. And I actually find it funny how many people, when you say, like, oh, I was born and raised in a cult, and they'll be like, oh, are you still in it? And I'm like, oh, no, because nobody who's in a cult says they're in a cult. Right. Unless you're in the Marines. They know.
Oh.
But,
Yes.
When you say white privilege, and that white person who hasn't deconstructed yet, like, looks like they've been struck or hit, it's like everything, every stereotype they have. It's very similar to when you say the word cult to someone, like, oh, that group that they love is a cult. And it just kind of, like, shuts down the conversation, right? We're no longer going to have this conversation because we're now both so offended by the implication of that term.
Like racist, like when someone says that's something, like, just the word, right? Not even calling someone, because often we're not calling anyone racist. We're just saying that thing you said was a racist thing. And the activation that you see in white people of, like, oh, how dare you? And it's like, even if that was what was being said, is that the biggest thing happening in the room right now? Like, this is how you react to being told. Imagine experiencing it. That's where are all the feelings coming from? It's the loaded language. It's the this means you explode, like you disappear, you disintegrate, like something happens to you where you're no longer a
Yeah.
worthy being because we said
Mm-hmm.
racist
Mm-hmm.
or white supremacy or white.
And, so these are all going to be subcategories now, right? So you have the cult language, right? Which is a whole, on my 10-part of cults, step 6 is a loaded vernacular, right?
Mm,
Like, or a distinguishable vernacular, right? So you have like your group's language, which I
yep.
describe as like, if you're going to sit in like an operations brief or a church meeting or whatever it is, and you need a translator to understand what's going on, US Army, like that is distinguishable vernacular, right? And this is part of why when I wrote my memoir, I used a co-writer that didn't understand anything about the cult or the military, because I wanted to make sure that I was translating all of my experience into non-cult civilian terms so that everybody could read it. Right. And
Right.
let me tell you, it even pisses people off when you change the cult language, when you stop using the language that the cult gave you for things and you
Mm-hmm.
start calling it what it actually is, like labor trafficking, exploitation, etc. People get very upset.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So then within cult language, you have loaded language, right? This certain phrase or word or song, I mean, can be all kinds of language, means something very specific, and usually layers and layers of things, right? And then under loaded language is the thought stopping cliche,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is a cliche that is parroted, and its purpose is only to shut down critical complaint. Two of my favorites are Boys Will Be Boys
Mm-hmm.
and You Knew What You Signed Up For. Right?
Oh,
You knew what you signed up for is never true, because how can you know an experience before you have it?
right.
And it's only used to shut down critical complaint. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I think when we say terms like white privilege or cult, those become in the wrong context, right? Those become thought-stopping cliches because
Right.
they're just like, done. I'm not talking to you anymore. You called me. You said what I said was racist. So now the conversation's over.
Right. And I think that even I remember saying to people, if you just call out thought stopping cliches, a lot of times people will at least stop to think, what is that, if they've never heard it before? And that may start a crack in the brainwashing to just say, hey, this is a thought terminating cliche. Um, because they're not always aware that that's what they're doing. And in whiteness, that language is so real, and there's so little awareness between white people that they're speaking a specific language, and they just believe that they're the default language. And all you have to do to be someone different is speak the same and just say, I'm Black. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
digital blackface doesn't really work on Black people as well, because we know what we sound like and we know what you sound like. But you don't know that we know. So people will just keep going and maybe throw in AAVE and a Black emoji, and it's just embarrassing for you. But that language is there, and the silence between white people that is enforced with modesty and things like that, and like not causing a rift, is why you don't realize like you all just said the same thing. The amount of times in my comment sections that people think they're really getting me with the literal verbatim, they say, imagine if a white woman had an account where she did this. Y'all would go crazy. Hundreds, hundreds. No one is, no part of me thinks it's anybody but a white person. Imagine, they start with imagine, the words literally every time. And this air of like adding things on to your language makes it better, like makes it, the more complicated, the better is an interesting choice. But it's exclusionary. I guess that's why it's the cult that it is like
Mm-hmm.
it's
And
words.
it's a cult tactic, right? It's called trance talk, and cult leaders will do this where they just say smart sounding words and they're jumping from topic to topic fast enough that you're not really keeping up with what they're doing.
Ooh.
And by the way, I used this tactic to great effect in my undergraduate when I was, 2 years out of a cult. And even being like the most dedicated student possible, I just didn't know things sometimes and I didn't know how to answer the essay question. I would just write 3 more paragraphs. And somebody on my comments on YouTube, they said they tried this and they were like, got an A in my dialectic theory class or something like that. Like it works. It's just that when cult leaders are doing it, they're doing it for much worse things than getting A's on papers. Right.
When you know that.
And then something else that you said, right, was like even just naming it a thought-stopping cliche, right? And I think this is so true just about all deconstruction, right? Which is once you can say it in a phrase or in language, you can start to see it, you can start to think about it. And that was my like confrontation with white privilege was, so I'm 26 years old. I haven't heard this term yet. I've been in the country for about a decade. But it's 2014. And another white male officer was trying to use me as an example for why white privilege didn't exist. And, very a la Daniella, you of all people know, you came here a decade ago with $0 and like, I was so excited that I had a term for what I had been trying to name for 10 years. Like I came into this country completely indigent and very, very ignorant of race relations. Because I'd literally grown up in a white people cult in Brazil, separated from everything. So I came in here and I start getting this education, right? I really, at the end of my project, Un-American, that I write about this, I say, I think white privilege is radicalizing white people from the moment you set foot in America. But for most white Americans, that's when they're born. I just happened to have this very clear experience where it didn't really start on me till I was almost 16 years old. And so even as I'm being programmed into it, right, I'm also noticing things and questioning things in the very beginning that are accumulating. And one of them was, why are people so nice to me?
Yeah. Right. And we talked about this and I was like, I had the opposite one where I would grew up and I was like, no, we're all cool. And I was like, why are people being so mean to me? And I didn't have the language. It's just so funny how this connects, but I didn't have the language. And it's so much of why I created the platform that I did and why I enjoy making up words and finding them and to provide to other Black people too, because there's so little talked about the actual experience of it and also challenging the language we've been given. So even white privilege, I question how much of a privilege it is. What does it lead you to not know things? Ignorance is bliss, type of thing. But having just the validation of the words and having other people go, oh my God, I didn't know this is what I was experiencing. But even microaggressions, I don't like that. Death by 1,000 paper cuts makes more sense to me. But that's not necessarily a word, but it's that language, microaggressions, passive aggression. That's all just words for white women to make it seem like violent, but not. But it's violent. Remember that first part? Violent, but not. Yeah, no, violent. Just not visible or, as distinguishable as what we're used to.
And that, brings us right back to language, right? And this is why literally, Amanda Montell wrote a whole book about cult language, right? And like the way that cults weaponize language and like using language to say, literally, this is what cults do, right? It's like, no, we're not a cult. We're international missionaries. No, we're not
Right.
trafficking you around the world, Daniella, as little apocalypse Lindsay Lohan. You are performing out of your own free will for these videos over and over again, and you're happy about it because you better be, right?
Right.
But when we associate things with that language our whole life, and then somebody challenges that language or that concept,
Mm-hmm.
like, so often the first response is just to like attack, because language is so primal and fundamental to us as humans.
I mean, it makes so much sense with the reaction I see in my comment section all the time. People have no clue what I'm doing, and you could tell because they're just so upset that I would name myself White Woman Whisperer, that I would even address white women, not be one, because then they're so confused, and then they'll say, I'm not black enough to do this. Well, but you're not white. It doesn't matter why I'm doing anything. It's that I have the nerve. And they're so activated. Like I said, imagine a black woman, imagine. And it happens so early. I know that people have made Black Women Whisper, mostly so that other people can't take it. But nothing happens because there's nothing there. It's like reverse racism. They think we're going to get activated by hearing that we're racist. But like, oh,
Right.
people call me racist literally all the time, every day.
This
I've
is
been
like, I say this in the opposite direction usually when I'm talking about the military banning women from combat. And I'm like, the interesting thing about when a group of people can't do something is you don't have to make legislations and regulations to ban them from it. Like there was no rules in my house that the daddy was not to be breastfeeding the child, right? Like I just wasn't concerned about it.
so what are the rules? And then what are the
Yeah.
rules? Who are the rules for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and like we're seeing this, of course, from just men across the board, right? Like the males are very upset about women with voices. And then you also get it from white women.
Yeah.
But like I'm right now going through the crazy like calling out the mansplaining. And then I literally made the video and I was like, wait for it.
Yeah.
And it's great because I'm trying to get to 5K on my new account. So they're helping me out a lot. But they don't know how to handle when they come trying to shut you up and they realize they cannot shut us up on our own platform with our own expertise, building our own language to talk about what we're talking about.
Yeah. And it just like they glitch, it's like you shouldn't, you're not, they'll find any reason to justify their anger. I'm sorry, my dog is crying at me so much.
Oh.
Yeah,
Do you need to pick him up?
well, I'm trying, but she's running away from me.
Okay, well, I think we have this nice division between what we talked about. Now we can start talking about body coverage.
Yes.
Is a big thing in cults, right? So within cults, within my step 4, which is what I call the constant self-sacrifice of the member, one of the ways you're getting members, you're like breaking them from individuality and teaching them that they're never more important than the group. And to do that, there's these 2 twin weapons of appearance control and attitude control. And we see all of this show up in white supremacy. Rebecca and I have already done episodes discussing 2 of the 4 things that we always see in appearance control in cults. One is hair. Definitely go check out our Black hair and white women episode. Then it is body size, and we did an episode on that. And then it is body coverage. Like, why am I blanking on this? Body coverage, and the last one is underwear. So stay tuned for that one. And today we're going to talk about body coverage. And let me tell you, because Rebecca, in my cult book club, we're doing a book on evangelical purity culture this month. So then I found a book. I didn't bring it up here and I'm still kicking myself for it, but it's on Black women's sexuality and the way that it is policed. And I would say in an entirely different way from the way that white women's sexuality is policed.
Yeah. It's like almost like the fear is that you would be considered anything like us. It's like the opposite of the purity. If you're born pure, and it's like you guys start at 100, and every 99, 98, you're getting closer and closer to being considered like a Black woman, and we are just below, and we can barely get to like 1 or 2. But when you get light skin, you get a little bit more. But um, the body itself of a Black woman, like, has the connotation of sexuality, period. So covering it is like you have to do so much, and you realize like it's more about the body, right? And avoiding being seen. And like, what is modesty? I was thinking about this, and I was reading some of your chapter on it. It's like, to me, modesty is not it's you're not supposed to want to be seen. You're not supposed to be seen wanting to be seen or heard. It's like the desire should not be there to even be seen. But like, Black women represent this loud, colorful nails, earrings, everything is associated with this wholeness, which is terrible. But it's like there is no amount of, there. I can think of the kindergarten teacher that was going viral because they're like, is this appropriate attire or not? But it was just because she had curves, and you could see the curves in the clothing, but she was fully covered.
Yeah. And speaking of curves, and white purity, there's so much about mainstream sexuality and beauty that we have been taught that is just appealing to pedophilia, right? In mainstream culture. And when I tell you I'm from the Children of God, the pedophile sex cult, right? Like, it's so creepy. And the more I see it now, because I've definitely played the I have to be super, super skinny my whole life game.
Mm-hmm.
I see how it is, the demonizing curves, right? Because you're supposed to look more like a little girl. You have the voice modulation, right? To like sound more infantile. All of these different things that we're doing. I mean, body coverage, think of hair, right? Like where we are and aren't supposed to have hair.
Yeah.
That is all about making us look like little girls.
Yeah. Once I like made that connection, it's really hard to unsee. It's like, what a, but you guys can have hair. What makes it, but which brings me similarly to body coverage, and what is our culture around body coverage and modesty, which is false, is made up, is what all I can think of. It's just like a made up morality test. Because how is modesty a moral value? Like, what is that? What do you mean? The more you want to
Right.
be invisible is the more you are good.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yes. That's what we are being told, right? And that's what women, I feel like, just always are being told, right? Throughout centuries are being told that like we need to be quiet. What is it that I say in my chapter on the skinny white women is that like good women are supposed to be quiet, skinny, and a light shade of beige.
Right.
You
And
know,
the beige goes down to clothing too, right? Like, you should be beige, but so should your personality. And we should be able to find you, spot you, and be the only one who sees the beauty you don't see. Like, you're supposed
yep,
to think you're
yep.
beautiful. It just, we are, but you're grateful for us seeing you beautiful, but you can't say thank you, I know. Because that is just. But you know what I just connected to is, I remember growing up and being so not confused, but the National Geographic of it all, right? This is where we see boobies, and they typically were from Africa, and it's like, those people don't wear clothes.
And there you have it. I already have a term for this where I say, like, if you look at it, the history of colonization is white men going around and telling brown and black women to cover their boobs.
Yeah.
And I think that's because you can't say shit to a woman with her tits out. Like, just try it.
Right. Cause she, and I just remember being like, okay, but if they're all like in my brand of autism, I'm like just doing the math. I'm like, but if they all have their boobs out, then it really isn't a big deal, right? Because when men here have their boobs out, we're pretty used to that and we don't flinch. Like the math wasn't mathing that we all,
Yeah.
it's just a body part. And if we
Right.
saw them often, we wouldn't be so activated by the mention, the hint of it from a shoulder. Because I'm pretty sure I heard that they consider, a lot of the tribes consider the breasts to be kind of like part of the face, because
Yeah.
that's just how they look. It's not sexualized because they
Yeah.
see it all the time.
And, you know, in our last episode, we talk about when my family and I went to like a nudist beach, and like, that's how it is there. Like, bodies are just bodies. You know, I love how like every woman comedian these days talks about her period on stage and how funny balls look. Right? Because like they have been policing those two topics, using those topics to mock us, right? Our periods and also how our private parts look. So like,
That's so funny because
y'all want to have this conversation? Let's have it.
I always say that race, I have a really old standing video, like race is like periods, like the way we talk about race and the way we talk about periods have been very similar and with similar goals, but they all just make us feel what they're supposed to make us feel like terrible about a part of ourselves. But the thing is, Black people do talk about race and women should be talking about periods, but with the other group, being able to hear it, like think about men going, oh my God, I can't even hear about that stuff. That's terrible. If they heard about it more, they wouldn't flinch so much. But also, like, how dare you? You're hearing about it. Yeah, I think you'll be okay hearing about it. I did that to my brother all the time. I tell him every time, because how dare you be uncomfortable hearing about it? Similarly with to me.
And I think periods go right into body coverage too, right? Because like historically, and even still in some places of the world, like when you're on your period, you are stuck to your house or to a room, right? Because nobody should ever, ever be able to tell that you are on your period. So if you can get away with it, fine. But if you can't, you need to like cover your whole self now and just take yourself out of society.
Yeah, like in the more Orthodox Jewish religion, like I didn't know anybody who did the mitzvah or mikvah, I think it is, where it's like they live in separate bed when they're menstruating, and then they have to have a whole 7 days after bleeding, and and the wash and this body hating.
And if they have any questions, they have to show their underwear to a religious leader to get it cleared before they can go back. So when we talk about underwear next week, like,
and and there is some kind of, as I learned more about white culture, I thought I knew a lot, but not being a white person, I can only know so much. I'm like, Black privilege may be a thing, because there is some degree of benefit to not being the golden child in a narcissistic system, right? Because once you're out of that, when you're not the golden child, you're the scapegoat. At least you already kind of know, you don't believe in the lies that if I just do this, I'll be good and I'll be accepted, and you don't have to like overcome that thing. Whereas Black people
are value, though, right? Though there's like value to it. It's not privilege if the system doesn't really like privilege you for it,
right?
But and something I find fascinating about the color, and I mean, I make most of my clothes now, and I literally just use all the color that I possibly can. But all of the color that we associate with Black women, of course, African influences, right? But it comes into American culture when American white women are insisting that Black women cover their hair, cover their bodies. And so fine, right? Like, you're going to say we can't have the perfect body type. You're going to say we can't show what we want to show. We are going to give you big, beautiful African dresses, big, huge hairstyles and hair coverings.
Because you're not going to like it anyway.
Yeah, so, and white women just eat their hearts out.
Yep. Because at that point, it's like, but, you know, when I was still indoctrinated, I had straight hair and I had blonde pieces and it was breaking. So this is what I mean, but I don't mean like real privilege. I just mean like, oh my goodness, the mental turmoil of being the chosen is something to be discussed, and like the deterioration of the self that happens when you think all I have to do is this and that will get me the thing. Whereas if you're already Black and you know that people aren't going to respect you, there's at least a level of like, well, we might as well just go for it. You know, there's a level of self-trust that comes. But when I was in and my hair was broken and fried and I was getting all the Black out of it, I was also wearing Black because Black was the easiest thing. I knew I couldn't get in trouble as much in the, you know, corporate America if I just Black, you know, and dark colors. And that's what they literally teach you to do. And eek, miserable, just everything. And then it become about hair coverage too, because in order to keep the straight hair, which is covering the beauty that it could be, I believed it. I was like, all I got to do is wear this costume basically every single day when I go to work, because I'd never wear clothes that look like white man. A pencil skirt. I remember going on this very big rant about pencil skirts. I'm like, what man made this? I can't get out of the car. It's the lines are good and I get that, but it's like pantsuit, the way that the dress code concept.
Yeah.
It feels like it's inevitable, but I don't think it is.
And I mean, also when we get into influences on like women's fashion, especially in America, we have Chanel, who was a Nazi spy and sympathizer. And we have Christian Dior, who made his names because after the war, women were so starved and he only made his clothes to fit you if you had a 20-inch waist.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad we spent lots of money to buy those things. I definitely never.
It's so funny because when you brought it up and you were like pencil skirts, and I was like, I love me a pencil skirt. Specifically the one I have in highlighter pink. Oh, but you're right. It's all about limiting you, right? Yeah. I mean, I keep wondering about this, like how's she gonna dress when she gets in the White House, and specifically footwear. Yeah. You know, like, I mean, that's just a limitation. It's a made up limitation by men that to be a professional woman dressed professionally, you must have a heel. And which it's like ridiculous. It's like so they can slow us down and hear us coming.
Right. And we can't run too fast because we've got and I criticize things that I participate in all the time. It's like, just remember putting it on and going, I know I look good. I know I'm more likely to get the interview to the next round if I wear the pencil skirt. So I'm going to get the pencil skirt, but I am going to also complain about the man who had this. And I have heels on heels on heels, but it's harder now to put them on and feel like, okay, like this is my choice. You know, like,
I just gave away like 50% of my heels, and it's hard for me, but like honestly they hang as a decoration in my garage, and my husband's like, you're never going to use these again. You're never going to like use these foot prisms. But here's the thing. Heels were a big deal to me when I was still trying to be a mostly invisible white woman, but I can't ever shut myself up too much, right? So I had phenomenal heels.
It was the
But
one
now that my
thing.
clothes are so vibrant and stand out, it's like I don't even need nor want nor can match the heels.
Right. Now I love a good white ked, dirty keds on the bottom, but it's because I'm wearing this rainbow cardigan top that I know everyone's going to be looking at, and I'd rather be able to stand, and I have a better time, and I actually look better in general with my friends when I'm not standing there wincing from pain. But it's like you have to get there, because I also felt like heels were my choice. Like that was also, it's like less of an investment. And we talk about body coverage, talk about the investment of it. Like
Yeah.
having to buy this costume, these men wear that stuff all the time. They don't have to buy work clothes that are going to be so different unless
Yeah.
they're like
Yeah.
athletes, something.
Right. But
But
also, if you think about it, right? Like the president of the United States is probably on their feet from 6 o'clock in the morning until at least 8 o'clock in the evening on a daily basis,
yeah, she should run
right?
versus.
So she shouldn't be starting off with a handicap, right? And this is,
Right.
I think this is the whole thing with the beauty conversation is like, yes, you can choose to play to traditional beauty standards, but you should understand where they come from.
Right.
And you should also, speaking of body coverage, I was a person that didn't leave their house after the age of 14 without a full face of makeup. I went from cult into Texas Christian land,
Uh,
right? And during basic training, I literally described it as getting to know my own face because that
mhm.
was the 3 months that I didn't have makeup on. And now for me, I've like done the work to get myself with both hair and makeup that like I can do it when I want to, but I know that I don't ever have to. Like I'm a completely valid person just the way I show up.
Yes, and I think for me, TikTok was a big part of that, of for my journey. And I remember seeing people like in their most vulnerable states in terms of just like, retainer in, bonnet on, and I loved that. Just being able to see the person as they are, and to me, it's like also these are strangers. They don't know what I look like. I had this belief that like, I still had this concept like people wouldn't know who I am unless I look exactly the same as I did when they met me before. Like I still have this when people find me from high school, I'm like, it's so crazy that they recognized me because my hair is curly now. And my friend was like, yeah, but your face is the same. I really believed, if I had to put the makeup on or people would be like, so on
I
TikTok.
wonder if this is a neurodivergent thing because I have the same thing, and I'm always surprised when people remember me.
Yeah, I think so because I still don't know what my face looks like. I know what it looks like conceptually, but like I've never really understood even my skin tone. I used to be darker, but I always thought I was darker than I was, and I'd have to ask my friends like, "Do I look like that?" I think I look like that, and I was always wrong. I was always wrong, and that's okay. But it's also just coming to terms with that too. And like
Yeah.
my face is my face. Sometimes I'll put
Right.
makeup on, and
Right.
it has to be for me, even if I
And right.
participate.
And this is the whole thing, right? The beauty myth and the beauty standards, those are about controlling women. That's why men don't have them. Right.
Yeah.
And in the book, The Beauty Myth, Naomi Wolf, who is kind of on the extremism train these days, but she talks about how it was like when women started demanding rights, right? So we get the right to vote, all of a sudden you see more restrictive appearance controls. Then we get more rights in the 60s and 70s, and all of a sudden you see much more conservative appearance controls. You see
Yeah.
models get skinnier and skinnier and skinnier because their reaction to, fine, you're going to demand power, is we will weaken and imprison you as much as possible, and we'll
Yeah.
go for the little girls.
Yeah. And I wonder, but how much of that is also like the self-sealing because you're still using the white supremacist like tools and tactics to get those things because even when they were demanding the right to vote, it was for white women, right? It
Absolutely.
wasn't. So it makes sense to me now that the result would be like it's just like more between white people of like this battle here. It's white feminism. And even in that competitive hierarchical system, there's only going to be room for so many women. So let's make it harder for these
Mm-hmm.
women, for all
Mm-hmm.
women, just white women, to get to that place because we earned it. There had
Yep.
to be some false merit thing going on in there that would cause infighting or whatever between women to make it harder, because there's still power and status you're aiming for. You want to do the same thing as the men, or
Right.
like be equal to the men, but it's like, wait, I don't think we should be centering what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think this is kind of the natural process when the people making the rules and the advancements are only thinking about themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So white women, we're only thinking about ourselves. Then we get the right to vote and we're like, oh no, they all have the right to vote too. Right. All the non-white women. So
Yeah.
now we got to start making like the desired life, the thing to grab bigger and bigger. I do campaigning, Veterans for Kamala. Like I'm always throwing around the veteran title for the blue side.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I say is it's just fun to be that person that gets up on stage and reminds people that veterans are Black and brown and women as well.
Yeah.
Right. And actually, when we talk about minority stuff, it's really cracking the brainwashing for people that veterans go in that category. Veterans have all of the disadvantages of your other, traditional minority categories, obviously intersectionality and all of that. Right. But a big part of why it strikes people by so much surprise is because when we think veteran, we are thinking, I used to do this exercise. Like if I told you to cast the post 9/11 veteran in a movie, right? I can tell you what he would look like. He would be 6'2", blonde, blue-eyed, with a jaw that can cut glass, and probably a helicopter pilot. Yeah. And I love the one of those that lives in my house, but that's not what all the veterans look like. But it strikes people because the men that look like that are not supposed to be in the disadvantaged categories.
Yeah.
Right. So it like gets people to kind of go through that whole thing and understand
this looks
like,
yeah.
That like disadvantages against a group really do impact your chances of getting to the top, because guess what? It's not a meritocracy, and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is impossible.
But the idea that, the body coverage would be the same, or to have a dress code, tries to kind of make it seem like everything is even. Like we all just, you put this outfit on and that's the thing that makes you even to the other people.
Yes. And good time, right? To remind people that appearance controls are always about prescribing behavior. They're never actually about appearance. Right. And so, for example, U.S. Army, right? We're in Afghanistan. We are not, by far, not the only country there, right? We're part of a 66 country coalition. And we are the only country that does not allow our service members out of uniform when they're off duty. So I kid you not, for one whole year, I never appeared in public in anything other than a uniform or a workout uniform. And when I tell you, I didn't go on R&R, I didn't go on my break till 9 months in. And when I tell you, I put on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, and literally my first thought was like, oh my gosh, I feel human again.
Yeah.
But what's the reason when we ask why we can't have stuff in our times off? Oh, because then, soldiers be out here in tiny little shorts and blah, blah, blah. And like, Rebecca, they don't mean soldiers. They mean women soldiers.
Yeah.
Because there's a thing in the Army called Ranger panties. And they are tiny, tiny, tiny little black shorts that leave nothing to the imagination that you can wear if you're in the cult of the cult. If you're a Ranger or Special Forces, like the Marines, oh my God, the Marine shorts are famous. Like, the men's workout outfit is literally what they are afraid of the women wearing.
Yeah. The behavior control makes so much sense. And it's like exclusionary in itself, in terms of, it reminds me of something I was watching about Bama Rush, like all these like sorority things. It excludes people by, these women have to pretend that they're blonde, but in order to do that well, that takes a lot of money. So they're saying like, we can identify who has a lot of money without asking about money. The first rule of White Club, you don't talk. You need to have money, but you cannot talk about money. You need to get in with the frat guys, and the frat guys have to like you, but you can never talk about frat guys, or else we won't let you in. Everything revolves around drinking, but no talking about drinking. But the aesthetic, like you said, it wasn't about what they look like. It was, why does this matter? It's like, well, this tells you this, and they all have this bracelet, and they all have this, and this costs this much, and
oh, and I mean, I specifically worked it out with my marketing people when I started my brand that like, I'm going to rock a crop top a lot, because if you're the person that is not going to listen to me because of what I'm wearing or what parts of my bodies are showing, then babe, like, you don't have enough prerequisites to take this class. So just sort yourself out of my audience. Thank you.
It's all the different filters we can put out there. Like I know we've discussed, like to say, to kind of protect us, to say, this is the type of person I am. So please stay away if this isn't going to work out for you. And if it, that's why I love the name White Woman Whisperer, because it did a lot of the work for me up front to say, one, this is what I'm doing, but also if this makes you uncomfortable, I please do not come here. Like if you can't get that this is hilarious, or, you know, you want to get offended and you're referring to us like animal. Okay. Then if you don't want to give me the benefit of the doubt when I'm here to help, then I don't want you in my vicinity, because you're going to bring me to a place or whatever. You're not helping.
It works so well. I mean, the first time I literally heard your handle was because people on the internet were yelling at you, and I was like, oh, I need her. Like, that's amazing that somebody would do that. Like, we don't want to just sit here and figure it out by ourselves. Like,
and you can't. I wish we could. I wish we could say you shouldn't need a Black woman to teach you how not to be racist. Yeah, but I know how. I'm good at this, and I can come up with things. And for those who receive my message well and my communication, like, this is what I want to do.
Right.
And I want to have this be a safer experience for those peeking in on it. And that's, you know, half of the battle, but it's weird to go.
This is a skill that both you and I have, which is like living in the future a little bit. We're the professional Cassandras, but also just putting words to things that people haven't put words for, right? Like, that's what writers and storytellers do. You know, I know that before I wrote a memoir, I read hundreds of memoirs, and every single one of them, you know, when I read a book about the Troubled Teen Institute, it gave me like the concept that these were religious prison camps. Like, I named that, and then I put that in my book so that other people could have that concept to their experience.
And so much is there. The Troubled Teen Industry actually gave me one of my phrases of kids are the new slaves. It was based on the Troubled Teen Industry, because I was like, the way they talk about them, replace it with enslaved people. It could be the 1600s.
That was my life. That was my life. And it took me a long time to realize that. And now I say it like that. I'm like, yeah, they turned me into a kitchen slave when I was 11. And that was up for being like a scrub, like a floor scrub person, or, you know, like,
it's like
children have no. I was so happy to see Kamala talk about that in her. She did like a chat, like a fireside chat almost, with Tim Walz. And nice. She talked about like children don't have rights, and we have to fix that. We have to do something about that.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Oh my gosh, I'm reading her memoir right now, and like all of the things you want to believe about her, all of the things people say she's not talking about, like right there in her book. She cares about women and children and Black and brown people. And I believe like so much is going to change.
Yeah. And she's working within a system designed for her to fail, and she's still trying. And there's a benefit to seeing that she changes, like she listens to voices. And, you know, people will say like, oh, flip flop. But it's like, don't you want someone who changes with new information? Do you mean when the people are like, boo, we don't like that, she should go, yep, I heard you. And I believe in my head, like for years, I've been hearing like ranked choice voting. And I feel like in this direction, it can be a conversation we have about changing the way we vote, because she would be open to hear that. And she doesn't see herself as like, as some non-human. And she's flawed. We're all flawed. But like, oh, good.
Also, like, again, she has that perspective that nobody else is seeing, right? Like she's going to bring, there has never been a Black woman perspective coming from the White House. Like, so she already has all of the other perspectives because those are the only ones we've been given. But she has hers. I mean, this is why when I see, like, you know, as someone who came up in the world of international violence, like so many decisions come down to the president and some military planners like me, and the president makes that decision. I absolutely expect that 4 years down the line, our country will be much less violent in many ways, just based on her as being a woman and then the things that she's told us that she cares about. I mean, I think it's going to be incredible.
Yeah, it's like a person. Like, you know, I don't like deifying anybody, but it's like, oh, okay, this is what they're supposed to sound like again. Because we've just had a really weird experience with the government recently. And it's like, okay, at least, you know, she's done things. She sounds like she cares. It sounds a little bit different. We're doing something different, which is really all I want. And then to empower the people to ask for things and imagine and like think in the future like we do and say,
I'm glad we finally decided to be like, well, the old man, white man route is not working. Like, maybe should we try like one other option? Oh my gosh.
Like the data isn't supporting the continuation. I gotta tell you, like, we're not doing so hot.
Oh my goodness. No, we aren't. So I made my first cat for my knitted cat lady outfit, but it's definitely giving mouse.
I mean, yeah, it's confused. It's giving.
I can't understand why it's giving mouse because I followed the instructions very deliberately.
Because they're curled. I think if they were straight, it would give.
Without the whiskers, it was giving more mouse. My daughter was like, you have to put the whiskers in. Oh, if they stick out straight. Yeah.
If they stick out straight, you get more cat. I think it's the curling that gives it mouse, but I don't know why. Because
and also, Rebecca, I picked up a phrase this week that I thought you would be a fan of. I was talking about how dress regulations in the military play into white supremacy and patriarchy, right? Because they're supposed to make you look like a straight white man. And somebody was like, oh yeah, I mean, it's still against regulations to be visibly Black in the military.
Oh, yeah.
And like, what they mean by that is you can have Black skin. But everything else about you, like when I meet you for the first time, I should be surprised that you have Black skin. Because you have not given me the impression of being Black in any other way, not on the phone, not in email, not with your name, and certainly not as you're approaching me.
You should be like, happen to be Black, which is how we talk about white people. And that's actually how you should view your whiteness, is like, you happen to be white. But we don't happen to be Black. We are Black first, but that's visibly, and someone recently said identifiably Black, and I really like that one as well, because it addresses the Blackness one. It's not just Blackness, not whiteness, in terms of like white passing, or it talks about people who are identifiably Black, which I always considered myself, but then when I got on TikTok and people wanted to not listen to me, they'd had to find any reason. And then they're just like, well, you're one shade away from being white. I was like, I don't know what that means. You mean white? What do you mean?
But also, you're not white then. Welcome to the one drop rule. The racism that was too racist for Hitler. Hitler thought that apartheid, a system where you could become white, was better, that the American system where you can't turn white, just like you can't turn Black, Donald Trump, like he thought that was too extreme, right?
Mostly white people. So they were all
something else, something else, as you were just talking, that was hitting me, that like makes white supremacy and white identity cult-like, but not Black identity. And it's because to be a cult, you not only have to be completely obsessed with one thing, right? One worldview. That is step 2 of my definition of cult. You also have to be step 7, us versus them mentality. You have to be against something.
Right.
This is why when people are like, Swifties are a cult, I'm like, what are they against? But when there was a coordinated effort to go after Jake Gyllenhaal, they were really giving cults, right? And so like white identity is specifically defined by not being Black.
Right.
Right? Whereas Black
Right.
identity is in no way defined by not being white.
Right. And people sometimes they think like whatever is centered is the thing. And they just, when white people only think individualistically, they think, well, they must be against white people. People think I hate white people because I talk about white people. But I'm talking to you. So that's, there's this very strange, like, we hate them, but you had Black people cook your food, which is really silly.
And raise your kids.
I'm like, so do you hate them or not? But there is an inherent hate, and then you're around them. So it's like a love. But Black people are just like, if you could leave us alone, we would be really grateful for it. Like, just leave us alone. We don't go into white neighborhoods to get it. It's Blackness is just living in a white supremacist system.
And whiteness has always been, we can't live with you and we can't live without you.
Yeah, but that's also similarly that's how they treat women. It's trickle down oppression is what I used to call it. It's like we get, then you get in a white form, and then it's like we're all impacted by the same system. It's just in different times and circumstances and stuff like that. But
yeah,
it can't be.
I get this, anytime I'm calling out misogynists, I'll get I feel so sorry that you hate all men. And I'm like, oh, I should tell my husband that I hate men. I mean, I wonder how he hasn't picked up on this. Like, maybe what I hate is misogyny and sexism, and I love men that aren't that.
Or they'll say, you care so much, they'll tell me I'm obsessed with white women. But my question is like, so why do you care? Like,
also it's let me explain it this way. Like, my husband at one point, he told me, like, I was getting in my big deconstructing journey of all the things. And he was like, I think you're starting to care more about feminism than about our marriage.
Sorry.
And I just looked at him and I was like, I just don't think you understand yet that, like, my identity as a woman, me and your girl child, are second-class citizens. I don't care more or less about it. Like, that's my life that I live every day.
That like either or thinking, which comes up like, if you think this, then that takes away from this other thing. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, it's like, I mean, when I was in a relationship, it was like, you care about this TikTok thing more than you care about me. And I was like, you mean finding my purpose?
Right. Yeah. It's black and white thinking, literal black and white thinking, that is cult think.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, of course you shouldn't have to choose, first of all, to like care about as many things as you want to. But like, it's just like these words can only be spoken by someone who has not had that identity. And so they think that, like, you're obsessed with TikTok, you're not finding your purpose, right? Or that, I get this from the veteran side. People are like, so what are you? Are you a proud veteran or are you disgruntled? And, in my book, I say that they used to tell us, and this was back in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell times, that women in the Army, you're either a bitch, a slut, or a dyke. And no, thank you, sir. I pick all three, right? This is me today.
I'm a person.
I just hit that back and I'm like, no, you don't get to tell me which box to be in, because the thing about when we do it, right? Like, you and I both bought into the internalized messages from the man, but we also played their game and we won at it. And so now we get to critique it.
Right. And they're kind of like, well,
right. And they don't know what to do because they don't understand our perspective. And this is the conversation I had when I sold my book, because my Uncultured is the first full-length memoir that we know of that was like it by a military woman in the mass market. And it's very critical. And so, of course, my publisher's worried, like, what's this going to be like? Fox News debating the general. And I just said, ladies, it was a full team. And I was like, ladies, I guarantee you, whoever they send to debate me, doesn't understand any of these issues. Like, they've just barely been briefed on the topic of my book. And this is what I fully expect to see with Kamala, right? It's like people are going to try to fight her, but they don't even understand the perspective from which she is coming.
Right. And like they don't give credence to experiences. So I often, when I got out of corporate America, and I was like, no. They talk about experience as an objective amount of time you did a thing which lends to you being good at it, I guess, your experience versus your experiences, which could have such a vast, especially as a Black woman in the government in California, is not going to be the same as some white man who is in the same position as her. The experiences she's going to have that are going to give her the resources to make better decisions with more informed brain than a white man is going to have just by their design. They designed it this way so that they didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
So now be quiet and don't do anything. We can't listen to them. Like if we center, and I think that's also, we changed the gaze, right? So if you said like you're one of these three things to them, right? You never became one of those three things.
Right.
But now that you don't ascribe to their view as the view, you're like, to you, I'm that.
Right. And that's exactly what it is, right? They're trying to proscribe my behavior. They're trying to tell us, people do this to any woman with a voice, like, oh, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, thanks, but I'm not doing what you're grading me on. Like, we're not even,
I don't know you, stranger. What do you mean I'm doing it wrong? Like the people with advice all the time are the people who love my content. But if you just this week I got one and it gave me the hint that I need to take a break because it was the microaggressions. I don't think we've done enough studying on them. I don't like that we call them microaggressions, but someone said, yeah, I love this, but I just have to agree with this person who didn't like me or the way I speak because they don't like when I start sentences and don't finish them. But I'm sorry, I'm neurodivergent. I'm going to forget. But they said, I'm just saying with all the wobbly camera movements and the silly extra long nails wagging about, it's very distracting. That is so coded at one.
I was like, I know she doesn't see herself telling on her racism, but like,
but it's so,
everyone else does.
And then it's like, well, my nails aren't actually strong, but even if they were, but you see how that is like appearance control and would indicate something. And they're using that weaponized concern language of I usually love, or I love what your message, but my opinion in all caps is you should stop moving like the person and looking and distracting me with your humanity behind it. And I said, you should get a book because TikTok videos are going to be distracting. In fact, look at all this. We make content for people who are distracted and want to be distracted. And
I wonder if this is even why the powers that be that hate TikTok so much more, if some of it ties into white supremacy, like you were saying, like when you found TikTok, when I found TikTok and I was like, oh, it's not glam. Yay, because I suck at Instagram because I don't like photos and I don't do glam.
Nope.
But like these plenty of white women influencers that love Instagram and I think are very intimidated by just showing up who you are as you are in real time on a video and just talking to people.
And just talking and saying something that maybe other people can relate to, but it isn't already being said. My friends still to this day can't believe I'm on TikTok the way I am because I am not interested. My dad was a photographer. I've got lots of camera trauma and is a photographer, was a photographer, whatever. But it didn't matter because I was finding people to hear what I'm saying and like, it's me.
Right.
And I could get through whatever critique and the camera and whatever because.
And it even plays to this, like, where white supremacy prioritizes like the written word and written experience over lived experience. But like, one of the things people can't stand about TikTok is like, if you just show up every day and you give expert level information, then you're an expert and nothing has to say it. Right? Yeah. Like, I have a fancier degree than you do, I think, but you have a lot more followers than I do. Like, you're an expert on your topic and they can't stand that, right? They cannot stand that they were like, these are the rules of the game. Which, by the way, my description of terrorism in my book Uncultured is that you're playing chess and then you're about to win and then someone pours gasoline on the chessboard and lights it on fire. And like, they did technically just stop you from winning. They just didn't play by the accepted rules of the game. And that is what I just think women in general are doing right now, especially Black women. All of these minority categories that have been kept out and have been told it's a meritocracy, play the game better. And now we're just like, we're playing a different game.
Yeah, we realize this game sucks. In fact, I don't like it. Monopoly was actually built, which is crazy that it makes so much sense. Monopoly was one of the analogy that Kimberly Jones made, who wrote How We Can Win and other books. I'm just obsessed with her. She made the Monopoly analogy and say we're playing this for 50 years and then you say we can't have stuff. And it just opened my mind. But then to learn that the person who created that game, it was actually called Landlords. And it was supposed to be about how terrible capitalism is. And then we were like, let's play for fun. No one is having fun playing Monopoly, as far as I'm concerned. Unless you're like strategic, you like exploiting your friends. It's, I think it's just realizing, like the piñata analogy I make, where like we've been swinging at this piñata for 400 years, and maybe let's play something else. Double Dutch looks like fun and requires swinging a bat.
Can I tell you about Brazilian piñatas? Because you can add this to your analogy, okay? So Brazil, Latin culture, but from Portuguese descent, right? It's called Lusophone culture, actually. And so in Brazil, at a birthday party, you have a giant inflated balloon hanging from the ceiling that is full of candy and confetti. And when it is time to hit the erstwhile piñata, all the kids gather around, the adult stands there, pricks it with one pin, it's done, room is covered in candy, go scramble. Whole different game. And when I first learned about piñatas, I was like, this is so unsatisfying. Like you get
terrible game, beginning to end. I'm not understanding. And then everyone has different rules. Are you spinning? And the kid is dizzy and blindfolded, and we're moving this, and he has a bat in his hand.
Also, what's the point of it? The point of it is to get candy. Like, there's far easier ways to get kids to laugh and scramble for candy than to like line them up and make them do violence.
Right. And then like putting all the people in harm's way. It is just that's why I also love the piñata analogy, because the people are like, what do we do? Do we swing and I'm like, how about we step away from the piñata? We listen to the Black women who are sitting here like trying to duck all your bats, for hundreds of years and talk about it. Don't look that sense of urgency to already know what's going to happen. But meanwhile, the candy is stale. It's got muck on it because it's been out in the rain and whatever, and just reevaluating and not looking at it as sunk cost either, because that part hurts. Like grieving my goals was hard, or to like value the MBA I got. I was like, oh.
But that is another thing to start to mention, and maybe this is a good place for us to end in our very unpredictable conversation today. But another thing that cults do, right, is they give you this mission, right? And I think when we leave cults, very often we are jonesing for the mission. Because what is one thing that being on a mission does? Like, it makes you feel so damn superior. Yes, it does. Like, you have something, you're going for it. And when I tell you, I mean, my perfectionism and my missionizing, it broke in one day. I got a huge book deal, and then Uncultured did not make the New York Times. And I literally was in my bed going like, is this it for me? Whatever. And that was when I asked myself, I was like, okay, so what? Say this is it, right? One of the things I love about being an author is I'm done. Anyone asks me what I do, like, I wrote a book. I'm done. I don't have to do anything else with my life for like the peanut gallery to decide that I'm accomplished. And
Yeah.
I literally went through, I remember walking through my whole life for 2 days very silently and just being like, if this is it, and realizing like, oh, I've created this beautiful life and I
Right.
get to
Yeah.
just work on whatever. Have I told you about Vampire Time yet?
No, I don't think so.
You're gonna love it because you're doing Vampire Time also.
Oh.
So every November, like after Thanksgiving, I take 6 weeks off and I just read witch and vampire books. And then I wake up in January with a new book concept. But something across the board in vampire stories, also in Greek god stories, which is to say in immortality, is
Mhm.
that like life loses meaning, right? Because you just go on forever. And
Cool.
you have no goals, kind of, right? So one of the things that vampires tend to do is get really good at different things. So by the time you're meeting a vampire, when they're 3,000 years old, they are incredibly intelligent, they're very rich, and they have a great wine collection. Right. And so when I met my goal, I worked on it for 5 years to like divorce my time from my money.
Yeah.
And now I was like, now I don't have to decide to be a thing. Now my whole life is vampire time, right? Right
Yeah.
now, I'm the knitting cult lady and I am doing this book and I am doing this content. And like in 5 years, I might be getting an MBA at the University of Maryland in sculpture and political protest using yarn.
Yeah.
And
And
then maybe I'll go do something else.
yeah, who knows? Because I didn't see this coming. And I think that helps when you get out of that cultic mindset and you undoctrinate. You're like, well, now that all of that, like I said, grieving those goals and just like thinking that you understood and that you had a mission to achieve. Yeah, I was jonesing for it and then I found it kind of here, but you're still stuck with you at the end of the day. But I do think that the creation of these lists, right? And creating numbers, putting numbers on our creativity is so hard to push through, especially as people like perfectionists, or it has worked before where we can get 100% on something. The fact that we could ever get 100% on something, I think is terrible for our brains because it's like you did perfect and now you should be always doing perfect, but there's no 100% in life. And then they create them by creating a New York Times bestseller list. How much different would your experience have been without that list? Because you wrote a book.
Yeah.
That's
I
insane.
wrote a book that is critically acclaimed and behind the scenes has sold very well, right? So there's nothing, even if I were to be disappointed, like that's not the case. But
Right.
you're absolutely right, right? Like, I mean, the pressure that you feel, literally, I mean, when I say I wrote a book, so often people will be like, oh, how's it selling?
Exactly.
You know, like,
and that is, I when I talk to, people in the industry or, I've met some people in LA where, they have a show coming out and I said to them, like, they're all nervous. And it's like, you have a show coming out, but what's going to happen is people are going to come up and say, what number are you? How did you rate? Are you this? Are you that? Because they want to categorize how well you did. You're totally moving past the whole years of time and investing. Now it's all boiling down to these numbers, but that comes from the tenet of quantity over quality. And people tend to think that means more is better. That's a different tenet. That's progress is more. Quantity over quality is valuing anything with numbers attached to it over something that doesn't have numbers attached to it. So if I just like, I wrote a book, people are kind of like, okay, but how did it do?
And this is exactly why the men who created GDP didn't attach numbers to women's work.
Exactly.
As we sit here crocheting. And as I've told some people that like, even the knitting, right? Everyone underestimates the knitting and they underestimate like how part of our popularity is the fact that we're sitting here doing traditional women's fiber arts. And like, that is freaking cool.
Right. And just leaning into our own gaze and not the male gaze. But for me, like wearing colors, but also wearing overalls and wearing my big funky, sweaters that I make myself is a way I can present that I still may be uncomfortable doing in the real world.
And like also like living in a world that you're literally making for yourself.
Yeah.
And I tell people this all the time. I'm like, it's okay for your mission to be you and for your mission to being you having a happy, fulfilled life. You know, like this is like currently my mission is that I want to make money just reading books and knitting. I'm doing pretty good so far. And
Yep.
like, I want Tom and Daniella and little Love Young to have a happy life. That is my mission, you know, and people try to pull you into missions all the time. I'm getting like pulled into this like fighting against cults world, and I'm like, nope, this is not my mission. Like, I'm doing this.
The cult. That's how you fight the cult. It's just crazy because it's very meta, right? Because it's like, but the cult is going to have you wanting to find different ways to define success for yourself, but your success is in not needing a way to define it. So it's very like self-care. I never really understood self-care as a term until I realized like, oh, when you clean your house so that you have a clean house. That's what's up. Not clean because I gotta clean because otherwise I'm a terrible person.
Yeah. Or the flip side, when Daniella learns that it is okay to leave dishes in the sink overnight, that things will not blow up, like that's self-care.
Exactly. Changing our initial perspective of like self-critique and turning it to like self-acceptance is revolutionary.
So well said. And if you have enjoyed this conversation, like this is what doing the work is, right? When we talk about deconstruction, when I say it takes a decade to deconstruct from a cult belief, I'm almost at the end of my deconstruction decade of, well, a lot of these things, I think, but like it's doing this, right? It's sitting around, it's putting language to it, it's having these realizations, and all of this stuff takes time. We're not going to be perfect at it, but we're showing up here and we're having the conversations. Thank you so much for this conversation today. It's like literally the highlight of my week.
I know. I enjoy these so much. I'm always just like, huh, who knew?
And the cat house head says goodbye.
Bye. That's funny. I actually like waved my little sleeve.
I know. That was very cute.